The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel echoed through the chamber. "Ma'am, your testimony lacks credibility," he said dismissively, barely glancing up from his papers. The woman in the witness stand straightened her shoulders, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. "Your Honor, with all due respect." She slowly reached into her jacket pocket, her fingers closing around something small but profoundly significant. What happened next would transform not just this trial, but everyone's understanding of who truly deserves our respect. Sometimes the most decorated heroes walk among us in plain sight, and sometimes it takes a moment of dismissal to reveal the depth of their sacrifice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Harris County Courthouse as Sarah Martinez adjusted her blazer and walked through the heavy oak doors. At 42, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people mistook for simple professionalism. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her navy blue suit pressed and conservative. To anyone watching, she looked like countless other witnesses who passed through these halls daily, ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. But Sarah Martinez was anything but ordinary. She had been called to testify in what seemed like a routine personal injury case. 3 months earlier, she had witnessed a devastating car accident at the intersection of Main Street and Fifth Avenue. A distracted driver had run a red light, slamming into a family's minivan with such force that it had flipped twice before coming to rest against a streetlight. Sarah had been the first on the scene, her training kicking in automatically as she assessed the situation, directed traffic around the wreckage, and provided aid to the injured until paramedics arrived. Now, as she sat in the witness waiting area, Sarah could hear the muffled voices from inside Courtroom 7. The plaintiff's attorney had assured her this would be straightforward testimony, simply recount what she had seen, establish the timeline, and confirm the defendant's negligence. She had done this before, though not often, and never with such visible reluctance from the court. Judge Robert Harrison had a reputation. 23 years on the bench had made him efficient, some said ruthless, in his courtroom management. He was known for his sharp tongue and his impatience with what he considered frivolous testimony. At 61, Judge Harrison had seen every type of witness imaginable, and he prided himself on being able to read people within minutes of their taking the stand. He had little patience for dramatic embellishments or emotional appeals that he felt clouded the facts. When Sarah's name was called, she rose smoothly and walked into the courtroom. The space was smaller than she had expected, with worn carpet and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a harsh, clinical glow. The jury box held 12 attentive faces. The defendant sat nervously beside his attorney, and Judge Harrison presided from his elevated bench with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority. "Please state your name for the record," the court reporter prompted as Sarah placed her hand on the Bible. "Sarah Elena Martinez," she replied clearly, her voice carrying the steady cadence of someone comfortable with formal proceedings. Judge Harrison glanced up from his paperwork for the first time, his eyes taking in her appearance with the practiced assessment of someone who had categorized thousands of witnesses. Middle-aged woman, professional attire, probably a suburban mom who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had seen her type before, well-meaning citizens who often confused what they thought they saw with what actually happened. The plaintiff's attorney, David Chen, began his questioning with standard preliminary inquiries. Sarah answered each question with precision, providing her address, confirming her presence at the intersection on the date in question, and establishing the timeline of events. Her responses were clear, measured, and detailed without being excessive. "Ms. Martinez, can you describe exactly what you witnessed at approximately 3:47 p.m. on March 15th? Chen asked. Sarah's posture remained perfectly straight as she began her account. "I was traveling northbound on Main Street, stopped at the red light at the intersection with Fifth Avenue. I was in the left turn lane waiting for the arrow. The defendant's vehicle, a silver pickup truck, was approaching the intersection from the south at what appeared to be excessive speed. The light had been red for approximately 15 seconds when he entered the intersection without stopping." Judge Harrison's pen paused over his notes. Something about her precise timing and technical language caught his attention, but not in a positive way. In his experience, witnesses who spoke with such clinical detachment were often overcompensating for uncertainty or trying to sound more credible than they actually were. "And what happened next?" Chen continued. "The defendant's vehicle struck the plaintiff's minivan on the driver's side with significant force. The impact caused the minivan to rotate counterclockwise and flip twice before coming to rest against the streetlight on the northeast corner. I immediately assessed the scene for additional hazards, checked for fuel leaks or fire risk, then approached the vehicles to determine the status of the occupants. Judge Harrison looked up sharply. Ms. Martinez, you assessed the scene. Are you some kind of accident reconstruction expert? Sarah met his gaze steadily. No, Your Honor, I simply observed the situation and took appropriate action. Appropriate action? Judge Harrison's tone carried a note of skepticism. And what qualifications do you have to determine what constitutes appropriate action in a motor vehicle accident? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's hands remained folded in her lap, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes, a tell that suggested she was restraining herself from saying more than necessary. I have some experience in emergency situations, Your Honor, she replied simply. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more dismissive. Some experience, I see. Ms. Martinez, are you employed in law enforcement, emergency medical services, fire department? No, Your Honor. Then perhaps you could explain to the court what gives you the expertise to assess accident scenes and determine appropriate action when trained first responders are presumably on their way. The courtroom had grown noticeably quieter, the tension ratcheting up with each exchange. Sarah could feel the jury's attention shifting between her and the judge, sensing the underlying conflict but not understanding its source. She had been in situations like this before, moments when her credibility was questioned, when people made assumptions based on appearances, when the truth of who she was remained hidden beneath the surface of who she appeared to be. Your Honor, I simply did what needed to be done, Sarah said, her voice remaining level despite the increasing hostility from the bench. Judge Harrison set down his pen with deliberate emphasis. Ms. Martinez, this court deals in facts, not in vague statements about doing what needed to be done. Your testimony suggests you took charge of an accident scene with no apparent authority or qualification to do so. Are you asking this jury to believe that you, a civilian bystander, somehow knew better than to wait for properly trained emergency personnel? David Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing that his witness was under unexpected attack, but uncertain how to intervene without making things worse. The defendant's attorney, meanwhile, was taking copious notes, clearly seeing an opportunity to undermine the credibility of a key witness. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, the courtroom waited in silence as she seemed to weigh her response. Those who had served with her would have recognized the look, the careful control of someone who had faced far more serious challenges than a dismissive judge, someone who had earned the right to speak with authority about emergency situations in ways that this courtroom could never imagine. Your Honor, she said finally, I understand your concern about qualifications. I can assure the court that my actions at the scene were based on appropriate training and experience. What training? Judge Harrison pressed, his voice now carrying an edge of irritation. You've stated you're not in law enforcement, not in emergency services. What possible training could you have that would qualify you to take charge of a serious accident scene? The question hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Sarah's composure remained unshaken, but something subtle shifted in her posture, a straightening that suggested she was drawing upon reserves of strength that ran deeper than most people possessed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the court reporter's fingers poised over her keyboard, and 12 jurors leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Sarah's right hand moved slowly toward her jacket pocket, her fingers finding something small and solid that she always carried. With her. The metal was warm from her body heat, familiar from countless times she had touched it for comfort or strength. In that moment, she made a decision that would transform not just this trial, but everyone's understanding of who truly deserved their respect. The silence in courtroom 7 stretched like a taut wire as Sarah Martinez slowly withdrew her hand from her jacket pocket. Between her fingers, catching the harsh fluorescent light, was a small velvet jewelry box, the kind that held something precious, something that represented far more than its modest size would suggest. Judge Harrison's impatient expression faltered slightly as he watched her deliberate movements, sensing that the dynamic of his courtroom was about to shift in a way he had not anticipated. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there moments before. You asked about my qualifications, about my training, about what gives me the authority to assess emergency situations and take appropriate action. She stood slowly, the jewelry box held carefully in both hands. I believe this might answer your questions. David Chen looked up from his notes, confusion evident on his face. The defendant's attorney stopped writing, his pen suspended in mid-sentence. The 12 jurors sat motionless, their collective attention focused on the small box that somehow seemed to command the entire room's notice. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled on her keyboard, waiting. Sarah opened the box with practiced care, revealing the contents to the courtroom. Nestled in purple velvet was a medal that immediately commanded respect from anyone who recognized its significance. The Purple Heart, America's oldest military decoration, awarded to those wounded or killed in combat while serving their country. The medal's purple ribbon was slightly faded, its gold edges worn smooth from years of careful handling, and at its center was the profile of George Washington, surrounded by the words, "For military merit." Judge Harrison's face drained of color as the recognition hit him like a physical blow. 23 years of judicial experience had not prepared him for this moment. The realization that he had been dismissing and belittling a decorated combat veteran, someone who had literally bled for their country in service to the very freedoms that allowed his courtroom to exist. "Sergeant First Class Sarah Elena Martinez, United States Army," she said clearly, her military bearing now unmistakable as she held the medal for all to see. Deployed to Forward Operating Base Shank, Afghanistan, from March 2019 to February 2020. I received this Purple Heart for wounds sustained during combat operations in Logar Province. The transformation in the courtroom was immediate and profound. Where moments before there had been skepticism and dismissal, now there was stunned silence and growing comprehension. The jury members' expressions shifted from confusion to understanding to something approaching awe as they processed what they were witnessing. This wasn't just any witness. This was someone who had served in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, someone who had been wounded while defending American interests thousands of miles from home. Judge Harrison slowly removed his reading glasses, his hands trembling slightly as the full weight of his mistakes settled upon him. In his decades on the bench, he had made errors of judgment before, but nothing quite like this. Nothing that so completely revealed his own assumptions and prejudices in such a public, irreversible way. Sarah continued, her voice steady but now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about emergency situations through the most demanding experiences imaginable. On September 14, 2019, our convoy was conducting a routine supply mission between FOB Shank and Combat. At Outpost Pirtle King, when we encountered an improvised explosive device approximately 12 kilometers northeast of Baraki Barak. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, every person present understanding that they were hearing something extraordinary. Not just testimony about a car accident, but a glimpse into the kind of courage and sacrifice that most civilians could never fully comprehend. Sarah's recounting was precise, professional, devoid of dramatic embellishment, which somehow made it even more powerful. The IED detonated beneath the second vehicle in our convoy, a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle carrying 6 soldiers. The explosion flipped the vehicle and caused significant casualties. As the senior NCO in the lead vehicle, I immediately implemented emergency protocols. We established a security perimeter, called for medical evacuation, and began triage of the wounded. Judge Harrison had gone completely still, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. Around the courtroom, people were beginning to understand not just what Sarah had done, but who she was. The kind of person who ran toward danger when others ran away, who made life and death decisions under the most extreme pressure imaginable. During the engagement that followed, enemy forces initiated small arms fire and RPG attacks on our position. While providing covering fire for the medical evacuation of my wounded soldiers, I sustained shrapnel wounds to my left shoulder and back from a rocket-propelled grenade that impacted approximately 15 meters from my position. Sarah's voice never wavered, never sought sympathy or dramatic effect. She was simply stating facts, the way she had undoubtedly done in countless after-action reports, the way soldiers learn to process trauma, by reducing it to its essential components, by focusing on actions, taken and results achieved rather than on fear or pain or loss. Despite my wounds, I continued to coordinate the evacuation until all casualties were extracted and we had established a secure landing zone for the medical helicopters. The mission resulted in the successful evacuation of 6 wounded soldiers, all of whom survived their injuries and returned to duty within 8 months. The defendant's attorney had stopped taking notes entirely, his legal strategy crumbling as he realized that attacking the credibility of a Purple Heart recipient was not just morally wrong, but tactically disastrous. David Chen sat transfixed, understanding that his case had just transformed from a routine personal injury claim into something far more significant, a moment when true heroism walked into an ordinary courtroom and reminded everyone present of what real sacrifice looked like. Judge Harrison finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "Sergeant Martinez, I owe you an apology." Sarah closed the jewelry box gently, the soft click of the clasp somehow louder than the judge's words had been. She returned the Purple Heart to her jacket pocket where it had resided through countless ordinary days, hidden beneath civilian clothes, carried through grocery stores and parent-teacher conferences and courtroom appearances where no one knew that they were in the presence of someone who had literally taken enemy fire to save the lives of fellow Americans. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying no trace of vindictiveness or triumph, "no apology is necessary. You asked about my qualifications to assess emergency situations and take appropriate action. I hope I've answered your question." The understatement was so profound that it seemed to echo through the courtroom like a physical presence. Here was someone who had been tested under conditions that most people couldn't imagine, who had proven herself in the crucible of combat, who had been deemed worthy of her nation's recognition for valor, and she was treating a judge's skepticism about her ability to help at a car accident as simply another question to be answered. Judge Harrison stood slowly, his judicial robes seeming suddenly inadequate for the moment. "Sergeant Martinez, would you please accept the court's deepest gratitude for your service to our country and my personal apology for questioning your credibility. Your testimony is clearly beyond reproach." "Thank you, Your Honor," Sarah replied simply, retaking her seat in the witness box with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the entire exchange. The remainder of her testimony proceeded without interruption. Her account of the accident was accepted without question. Her assessment of the defendant's negligence treated as expert observation. Her description of the aid she provided to the injured family received with the respect it deserved. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a verdict in favor of the plaintiff, with damages that reflected not just the accident's impact, but their understanding that they had heard testimony from someone whose word was backed by the highest possible credential, bloodshed in service to others. As the court session concluded and people began to file out, something had changed in that room that went far beyond the legal outcome. 12 jurors, 2 attorneys, a judge, and dozens of observers had been reminded that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized, carrying their service quietly and with dignity. They had witnessed the moment when assumptions crumbled in the face of truth, when prejudice gave way to respect, when a Purple Heart commanded the recognition that its bearer had always deserved but rarely received. Sarah Martinez gathered her purse and walked toward the courtroom exit with the same quiet confidence she had carried when she entered. But now, everyone who watched her leave understood what they were seeing. Not just another witness heading home after fulfilling a civic duty, but a decorated combat veteran whose very presence had transformed their understanding of what true credibility looked like. In a world where we often judge others by their appearance, their age, or our assumptions about their background, Sarah Martinez's story serves as a powerful reminder that extraordinary courage and sacrifice often hide behind ordinary facades. Her Purple Heart didn't just represent a medal. It represented a moment when she chose to put others before herself, when she faced enemy fire to save her fellow soldiers, when she earned the respect that should never have been questioned in the first place. Judge Harrison learned that day what we all must remember: that dismissing someone's testimony, their experience, or their worth based on appearances can blind us to the heroes who walk among us. Sarah Martinez didn't need to prove her credibility with a medal. Her character, her precision, her quiet dignity should have been evidence enough. But sometimes it takes a Purple Heart to remind us that the person sitting next to us might have stories of courage we can't imagine. To every veteran who has served, who has sacrificed, who carries their service with quiet pride, thank you. Your courage in the face of danger, your commitment to protecting others, and your willingness to serve something greater than yourself deserves our recognition every day, not just when you're forced to prove your worth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to look beyond appearances and honor the service of those who have given so much for our freedom, please subscribe for more stories that celebrate the unsung heroes in our communities. These are the stories that matter, the moments that remind us of the best of humanity and the people who deserve our deepest respect and gratitude.